Hello and welcome along to another episode of the Tackling Sport podcast. It's Daniel Hussey, your host here as always, joined by my brother Sean. Sean, how's it going? Another week gone. It's mad. Time's flying these days, isn't it?
Time flying, and the evenings are getting very short now.
Yeah, you were saying that it's getting a bit darker now. We're kind of coming into winter season. The gas long gone now. That is in the inter-county side of things, but yeah, the evenings are getting shorter for sure.
Yeah, it's funny how from from the start of August to the end of September just kind of flies by, and when obviously the schools go back, and I suppose people are back into their winter routines then slowly, and you always notice it when you can't get out and play around the golf at 7:30, 8 o'clock for 9 holes. So yeah, it's an interesting time, but thankfully we have a lot of sport to keep us going and a lot of good Irish sport on.
Absolutely, we do. There's another stuff we're going to cover today. The Champions League draw, a bit on the Premier League, a little bit on Shamrock Rovers playing in Tala, a bit on Evan Ferguson last night, and a few of the Kenny's kids playing for Brighton. I think there was 3 in total. LIV Golf, there's the saga that keeps rolling on. Tiger and Rory have kind of responded. The PGA Tour players have responded. So there's actually a lot of good stuff for those outside the golf bubble. Look forward to it. If you are listening on the podcast, the description is where you'll find the timestamps of all the topics. You can kind of skip forward and back, whatever way you want to do it. And all we ask is if you are watching us on YouTube, thanks for listening, either on the live stream or back, hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to our YouTube channel, it's completely free, and follow us on your preferred podcast app. Again, it's completely free. Sean, I was meant to update the background with Tiger and Rory, but I'll do that intermittently when I'll just read out the Champions League draw to start with, and then I'll get your take on if you have any kind of thoughts on it. I actually had the misfortune of watching this in the background, and I knew it was going to take long. It still doesn't. It still surprised me how long they actually take. Poor Yaya Toure was all day with some of those balls, but they got there in the end. Group A: Ajax, Liverpool, Napoli, Rangers. Definitely one of the group of the marquee groups. Porto, Atletico, Bayern, Leverkusen, Club Brugge, AC Milan, Chelsea, Salzburg, Dinamo, Zagreb in Group E. Group F is Madrid, Leipzig, Shakhtar Donetsk, and Celtic. Celtic going to the Bernabeu, like you were talking about. PSG, Juventus, Benfica, Hafia, Manchester City, Seville, Borussia Dortmund, Copenhagen, Eintracht Frankfurt, Spurs, Sporting Lisbon, Marseille, and then Group C is Bayern, Barcelona, Inter Milan, and Victoria Pleasant. So yeah, Sean, your thoughts? I think you wanted to start with Celtic going to the Bernabeu, and then obviously on to potentially Poland to play Donetsk.
Well, in fairness, I think we gave Scottish football a bit of a baton a couple of weeks on the podcast after Sligo Rovers dismantled Motherwell over 2 legs, and Graham Alexander got the sack off the back of it. But considering where, particularly you look at Celtic during the Brendan Rodgers era, never really cracked that European code, despite being all conquering in Scotland. So for Scottish football to have its 2 marquee clubs back in the Champions League, it was something always growing up that Celtic and Rangers were always there. And always seemed like there was big marquee games for those clubs. So for both clubs to have, you look at Rangers' group, to have Ajax, Liverpool and Napoli, 3 big sides with a lot of European pedigree, and then Celtic obviously to have the holders, the best team ever in the history of the competition.
And a car, Celtic. Sorry.
Yeah, so it's huge for Celtic, and to have a proper European night, as much as they had some really good some Europa League nights, and did a couple of big away games. There was one in Lazio, and to have the Champions League anthem back at Celtic Park and back at Ibrox would be huge for both clubs. So I think Celtic won't fear anyone under Ange Postecoglou. He's that kind of character, but it'll certainly be a huge test for them. And like I said, to have Real Madrid, they don't come much bigger than Real. And then obviously Rangers had a huge win last night to get through. And there had been a little bit of talk with Alfredo Morelos being left out of the squad. Giovanni Van Bronckhorst has come out of that situation really well, despite Morelos being undroppable, a year, 2 years ago. So it's an interesting dynamic, that. And like I said, for the two Scottish clubs to be back in the Champions League, it's some achievement considering the rest of Scottish football really does leave a little bit to be desired.
Yeah, and I guess Celtic and Rangers can kind of elevate Scottish football. I watched PSV versus Rangers. I have to say PSV were very poor, but you can be not impressed, not just in how Rangers went and scored the goal, but the way they saw it that last 10, 15 minutes. There was no messing. They were going to the corner from the 81st minute on, But you have to, in fairness, Gio Van Bronckhorst has done some job at Rangers so far. Definitely showing up Stephen Gerrard a small bit, but also the fact that like you said, the way he's dealt with Morelos was very like perhaps Arteta's dealt with Ozil and Aubameyang situations, not too dissimilar. I did kind of smile when I think Chris Boyd was quoted saying Morelos is one of the best players in the league, if not the best player in the league, maybe 2 weeks ago. And now he's saying Van Bronckhorst is dead right. He hasn't been fit in weeks. So there's always that smile. I guess my Twitter feed is majority Celtic fans, perhaps, but maybe tinted glasses. But I'm delighted Celtic got a slightly easier draw than Rangers, because Rangers do seem to get the luck of the draw there in terms of that. For me, the highlights looking at it, Tottenham got a Europa League group there with Frankfurt, Sporting Lisbon, and Marseille. Nothing new there. But yeah, I think the standout having Bayern, Barcelona, and Inter Milan. I'm really excited, and I mean, like, I don't agree with what Barcelona are doing. This, short-term thinking. Let's refinance everything. It's like exactly what happened in the banking collapse. You know what I mean? But you don't do that with a football club. But I am excited to see, on the other hand, what this Barcelona team can do, and if they can improve their Champions League performances over recent seasons. So yeah, Bayern Munich, Inter Milan, that should be a good group. Chelsea, Milan, Salzburg, Dinamo, and then the last one we had was Manchester City getting Seville, Borussia Dortmund, Copenhagen. So there's good games. I know there's a lot of talk with money in Europe, Sean, and whether that the competitiveness of the Champions League is kind of going out of fashion now. We do have this new Swiss league format from next season. So this is going to be the last season of the group stages, but I do kind of like it, albeit I do also appreciate that the competitiveness of this group stage is probably going out. Like I saw Miguel Delaney tweeting that essentially the 14 well-teamed clubs out of 16, you could be certain they're going to qualify, and it's just maybe 2 positions that are under threat. So in some ways you'd argue, yeah, let's bring the Swiss league format, but I'm not looking forward to that at all, to be honest with you. And there's always that little bit of excitement in the group stage, albeit the last 5 years hasn't quite gone that way.
Yeah, I think that what I find is you have a lot of clubs like Inter Milan, AC Milan, where Barcelona are right now, Juventus, Borussia Dortmund as well, where they're not the top seeds anymore. Well, bar AC Milan. So if you look at Bayern Munich's group, Inter Milan are the 3rd seed. A huge football club. You look at Borussia Dortmund, they're the 3rd seed. Napoli, the 3rd seed. So there's a huge lot of competition in terms of the big names. So you're seeing more groups. You're seeing less group stages where there's 1 good team and 3 average sides, particularly in club stature. Like that Bayern Munich, Barcelona, Inter Milan group sticks out a mile. Obviously the Liverpool group with Ajax, Napoli, Rangers, that just feels like a big group. Whether Rangers are going to, they'll fancy themselves, but whether one of those teams finish on 0 points is really irrelevant. All 4 of those games, all 4 of those teams have real meaning and big clubs in their own right. But there is. I find the group stage, like I find at times. Well, maybe in Ireland, because of it's only 1 game, I think sometimes they show the wrong game, and it's hard to pick the right team, and it's hard to make sure your viewer figures are right. So there could be an example where, you could have Man City are playing Borussia Dortmund, but because Liverpool are playing Ajax that night in Ireland, in this country, we'll see the Liverpool game, but maybe Man City Dortmund will be a better game. So maybe, I think some people like to give out about most things anyway, so that they might say the Champions League group stages is boring. But when you look at the Europa League and look at the Champions League, you would say the Champions League group stage is a lot more competitive. Like, I struggle to see any side there really that will pick 18 points from their 6 games. Maybe.
Well, I guess the qualification, like you said, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
I must say, I think Spurs have certainly avoided a lot of the big guns, and they'll really fancy themselves. Obviously, getting
just to correct the record there, the Swiss model kicks off in 24-25, so we will have next season as well. But yeah, like you said, the first place, I guess it's competitive between the 1st and 2nd seeds and a bit of the 3rd seeds. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I think Spurs will fancy themselves. I think they're kind of a Champions League team as well, especially under Conte. I know he hasn't got the most dynamic record in Europe, but if you just look at that squad, Perisic now, Lloris World Cup winner, Harry Kane, Heung-min Son, I know they got Longley in from Barcelona. That just looks like a really sturdy squad at the moment, and especially with the group, they'll be very buoyed, and for them to have Champions League nights, again at that new stadium. But like I said, it's you do kind of feel there'll be 4 teams that could win it. I don't think we're going to get a golden era of, the early 2000s when you would have been watching it down, where you had the likes of different winners every year. You had Porto, then Liverpool, then Barcelona, then AC Milan, then United in 08 and Barca in 09. So you had a little bit. I don't think you're going to see that anymore, because I think there's the Guardiola, Klopp, some of these managers are so far clear of the rest. And then obviously they've the resources on top of that. So maybe we are seeing a less competitive in terms of who's going to win it. But like I said, you've clubs like Bayern Munich. No one would have given Real Madrid a sniff last year, certainly after they lost to Sheriff in the group stage. So when you have a club with that history like Bayern Munich, like Real Madrid, like AC Milan, they always have a chance in these competitions. So it's going to be an interesting one. I think you will see the winner come from, your PSGs, your Liverpool, your City, and maybe a Real Madrid.
Yeah, perhaps. The last thing I do, like Man City are favourites, and just with Haaland, I just think all the eggs will be in that basket, which is why I was thinking Liverpool perhaps could kind of sneak off with a good start in the Premier League. I know it's only 3 games in, but that just seems so far away. But even kind of segue from that point a little bit, Liverpool, perhaps if they don't manage to claw that gap back within the first few games, then they might start focusing themselves on just the Champions League, given that they're in a really good position. They're starting level on any given day. They may not have the consistency this season, perhaps with that midfield in the Premier League, perhaps, but in the Champions League, they can definitely have a run for sure.
But they have a difficult old group, though. I think they'll be a little bit wary. Yes, they don't have any of the big names, but you have a lot of sides there. Like Rangers will really fancy themselves, particularly at home to Liverpool. Napoli, who they've had a lot of recent history against in the Champions League. I know Napoli have obviously lost to Koulibaly in particular, and then Ajax obviously under new management. But it's not the easiest group. It's kind of a tricky group. But yeah, I think right now Liverpool have to get a few, I would say, signings over the line, but I don't think they will with this late to the window. But
they're kind of stuck between deciding not to go for players overvalued. Like you would never see them in for a Morgan Gibbs White. Not that they need this type of player, but just in terms of the finance of it, or Anthony Gordon for those sort of deals. But maybe they should just bite the bullet and splash the cash on Jude Bellingham, who started very well this season for Dortmund, albeit in a poor Dortmund team. But like I said, it doesn't seem they're going to do it. One thing to note as well, the World Cup happening in the middle of it. So the Champions League has always been split into in terms of group stage and knockout stages. That's not why the World Cup's going to have an impact. The World Cup's going to have an impact because it's literally, as far as, and I think it's 6 group stage games in 8 weeks, and one of those weeks off is an international break. So it's literally all the way along, bar I think one Carabao Cup round, perhaps, I think. And that's it all the way through. So it's going to be non-stop. You're going to hear a lot of managers complain about the fixture pile-up. And so if you don't have your business done within the first 3, 4, 5 group games, then your league performances are going to suffer, or the Champions League perhaps, or both. But before we move on, Sean, one thing I did want to talk about on the Champions League is Spurs, and what I mentioned in our Premier League preview about Antonio Conte, right? So he's always been the league. Maybe not necessarily by choice, but just the way it's worked out. Like I do remember him really going for it with Inter in the group stage, and they just couldn't get out of that, a tough group. I'm very interested. I know they have an easy group and a Europa League group on paper, but I'm fascinated to see, will he rotate Kane during Premier League weeks? Like I mentioned, the 6 Champions League game weeks in 8. Will he rotate Kane, Son, Perisic? He does have the squad to rotate, but how is he going to go about that with Spurs? I think that's fascinating over the next few weeks for sure. What exactly Spurs do in those first few Champions League group games, and does their Premier League team change around as a result?
But I think that's probably why they bought Richarlison in for big money, because a lot of people would have said, well, he probably doesn't get into their best front 3 at the moment with Kulusevski, Son, and Kane, but he just adds that little bit of squad depth and dynamism. So yeah, look, I think Spurs they've had a pretty good record in modern times in the Champions League. Obviously, getting to a final, beating big teams on their way. So I think they've obviously, like I said, they've avoided a difficult group, which will help them. But it's hard to know. I think the World Cup's going to be an interesting one, because it's similar to the to the Champions League and similar to the Premier League, that I get the feeling in the Premier League something could happen this season out of the ordinary with the World Cup. I just think a player could get injured, or you could get on a good run of games. Like the Premier League ends in after 17 games, I think it is in the start of November. So you've a good start to the season. You go on a run, you take it game by game, and you're not in Europe, or you're in like Arsenal, you're in the Europa League, or you're like United in the Europa League, where you don't have to play your best players every week. So there could be a little bit of that, and I think similar to the Champions League, the World Cup, we know how intense it is. We know how intense the schedule is. So players could get injured here and there, and that could add a huge difference. Because if you take a couple of players out of certain top teams, like you take maybe an Mbappe out of PSG, or you take a Haaland now out of City, or a Van Dijk out of Liverpool, and obviously Haaland's not playing in the World Cup, which will be a big help for City. But you just, those little injuries that can happen when games are coming thick and fast. Kane for Spurs, so we could find a couple of surprises, and you might see a team get to a quarterfinal, semi-final, just get that luck of the draw, almost like when Chelsea won it. And Chelsea won it, they got a good draw, and they took full advantage.
And even moving on a little bit, just to talk very briefly on the Premier League heading into this weekend, I think I'm fascinated to see next week's fixtures, the midweek fixtures, and how like anyone remotely interested in fantasy Premier League would have been aware of Guardiola's quotes about Haaland and the rotation, how he definitely can't play 3 games in a week. That's what Guardiola said. Whether that bears fruition or not remains to be seen. So he's obviously going to target those Champions League group stage. Realistically, Haaland's probably getting rested for Alvarez midweek next week. So it depends. Some of those midweek games, you could see some of those shocks, like you mentioned, in Champions League, but in the Premier League perhaps. But on the Premier League, Sean, we both actually picked Liverpool at the start of the season, and it's hard after 3 games to just change your opinion completely, but you have to be so worried for Liverpool. I think the crucial injury is obviously Thiago, and even trying to see Liverpool pass the ball around, you're like, Thiago was in there. Not that they would have beaten United or anything on Monday, but they would have just had more going forward, and James Milner in centre midfield, well, he got on a lot of ball and probably did better than maybe Henderson in there himself. He's just probably too old for that role. So without Liverpool signing another midfielder, you'd struggle to see how they can keep pace with City, given the start City have done, where City haven't really clicked into 3rd or 4th gear, and they're already 5 points clear of Liverpool. So do you see it as just City and the likes of Arsenal, Spurs, Chelsea, Liverpool are battling it out for that 2nd, 3rd, and 4th spot, and maybe perhaps United with Ten Hag?
Yeah, I would worry for Liverpool, and it's not just the results, the performances, but it's also the body language. They just look all out. Do you know what they look like? They've had 45 games, and this is their 46th and 47th game of a long season already. And you're supposed to come back from pre-season sharp. I think the end of last season it's more of a mental toll on them, to go so long with the quadruple on the line, to win the Carabao Cup on penalties. I think they won the FA Cup semi-final on penalties. Anyway, I think they won the FA. They did win the FA Cup on penalties as well, if I'm not mistaken. But they just went right to the end. They were nearly there in the Premier League that last day with City beating Villa, and then the Champions League final. I just think it's taken a mental toll on them, and something's not right. Something really isn't right at Liverpool. I know a lot of people have spoken about Klopp's 7th season, where it happened at Dortmund, where they had to fall off, and happened at Mainz as well when he was there. But it's something bigger than that. There's just something not right at Liverpool, and even with a couple of issues.
Is it as simple as saying Sadio Mane?
Yeah, I think it's more than that. I think it's buying a player. It's probably not buying enough players, not refreshing enough things. Like that midfield hasn't been refreshed in quite a while. You think of that midfield since Fabinho joined, it's only Thiago and Naby Keita, who Keita's a bit of a write-off for me. Like never been fit enough. So they haven't really refreshed that area. They've got 4 really good centre halves. Obviously, 2 of them aren't fit at the moment. They've actually 5 if you include Phillips. And I just think they're one shy in midfield. They've got brilliant fullbacks. But just that midfield there, they're just missing something. Do you know what? And I look at someone, and you look at Guimaraes for Newcastle, who just at the end of last season, he was probably one of the players from the transfer window. And you look at someone like him, and he's all action, but he can control the game. And you just think someone like him could excel for Liverpool. Now, I think it's probably a consensus around that they want Jude Bellingham. I think, at the age he is, I think he's 18, 19.
And they're willing to, like we talked about a minute ago, they're willing to wait for him, but perhaps cost themselves the first half of this season or the whole season.
Well, I was having this conversation with someone a little bit earlier that I said, like, if you keep waiting for Bellingham and you don't have a good season this year and you miss Champions League, and all of a sudden a Man City comes in from, or a Chelsea have a good season and they come in from, and if you're Jude Bellingham, you're weighing up, should I go to Liverpool, who are kind of a team getting older, Van Dijk's getting older, Salah's in his 30s, Henderson, losing Mane, Firmino's getting older, and then you're thinking, do I go to Man City, which is a safe bet, or Liverpool? So they can't hold around for too long. I think there is midfielders out there that they can pinch. Even I saw, they just have to look at their rivals, Everton. I know Everton spent 30 million on this Onana, and I saw him come on against Aston Villa. And I watched the highlights, and his direct run, and he's a presence in midfield. I just think Liverpool lacking, especially when Fabinho doesn't play, they've no presence in central midfield. They've none of that physicality. Someone that'll take the ball, that will drive forward. And who knows, maybe they're looking at Declan Rice as well, because I think Rice would, at the moment when Fabinho doesn't play, they need a Declan Rice or someone of that ilk in there. And it's hard to know, like, if you're Declan Rice now, and West Ham have obviously lost their first 3 games, you're looking at it, well, you're not going to City anytime soon because they have Rodri and Calvin Phillips. You're probably not going to Arsenal. Probably they can't afford you, and they aren't at the standard where he probably thinks he should be. Are you going back to Chelsea, where you were let go of? Potentially. And then it's probably Chelsea or Liverpool are his 2 big options. And maybe United, if they come back, obviously the size of the club and with their financial power, they can bring anyone in. So if you're Declan Rice, you're probably looking at it like you're certainly not going to City anytime soon. And if he wants to make that next jump, and maybe he doesn't, does he go to a Liverpool? And I think he would work at Liverpool. But that's where Liverpool are at the minute, Dan. And I think, I know Chelsea had a poor result against Leeds and we're all over the place, but they're still a good side. You have Spurs, who at the moment just find a way to win and find results.
Yeah, just before we move on from Liverpool, just their next few fixtures: Bournemouth at home, Newcastle at home, Everton away, Wolves at home, and then leading up to a massive game on a Sunday afternoon away to Chelsea. So take those 4 games. Like, I still expect Liverpool to come out of that with a response, because if like Bournemouth, I definitely think they'll win. Surely, I think there'll be a bit of a response. There has to be. But we've seen them obviously struggle to break these sides down. But I think Arsenal and City have shown that Bournemouth can be got at. I think Bournemouth will be good at maybe taking points off teams around them. So expecting a response there. But it's a Wednesday night game at home to Newcastle, who play very well against City, albeit their defence might not be quite all there yet at Newcastle. So maybe they'll sneak the win there. Then it's a Merseyside derby. So there's massive games.
Liverpool have huge injury issues, and then it's not helped by the stupidity of what Darwin Núñez did. So I'm not worried about. I wouldn't be too worried as a Liverpool fan. I still think if they got that extra midfielder, it would also just freshen things up slightly. And like I said, it's a position where there is quite a lot of unearthed talent out there in the foreign leagues. You look at some of the midfielders that have come into the Premier League in recent years and done really well. But I wouldn't be too worried for Liverpool. They've so much attacking flair, and when they get Jota back, when they get Núñez back from suspension, I know Mane's a big loss, but they still have Salah, they still have Van Dijk, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Robertson, Alisson, Fabinho when he's fit. What I would say is that the United game actually came at a bad time of the season for them, having had a couple of bad results. United with the protests, with Ten Hag's first proper big game at home. United after being drubbed by Liverpool the season before. It just, with the injuries Liverpool had, it just felt like before the game it was like, if they don't get if United get the first goal here, Liverpool maybe don't have that attacking impetus to go and claw them back. So it's they were on a little bit of a hiding to nothing when you saw Fabinho wasn't playing and Milner and Henderson were in midfield and Harvey Elliott as well. But I wouldn't be too worried about Liverpool. I think they have enough certainly going forward when they get Jota back in particular. Yeah.
So the remaining sort of before, I do want to be very brief on this because we have a lot to discuss on the other topics. But yeah, the Chelsea were poor. United coming back, but a poor start to the season. Liverpool are poor. Spurs, looking okay. I don't think I've been overly impressed with them yet in terms of Conte hasn't got that unbelievable performance out of them, but they're 7 points out of 9, which is the worrying thing. But and there were moments like Southampton Chelsea games that you were like, yeah, that was a good team, but the Champions League is going to come for them. If Arsenal get off to a good start, Sean, is there a possibility that they can run in behind Manchester City for the rest of the season?
Yeah, like there is a possibility. Be interesting to see what happens with Europe, because we have bulked our squad up. I know Pepe's just gone out on loan to Nice, and that just 70 million has not worked.
And what an atrocious signing. I don't care. I know style of play never really suited them the way Arsenal play, but I just can't see him. Haven't watched them now a lot. I know, again, qualifying all this, we're saying, yeah, we didn't play it wasn't the Pepe team or anything like that. But there's no way on earth that player is worth 72 million pounds. He is still, I think, the inside the top 20 most expensive transfer signings of all time.
Oh yeah, well he would be, but I think it's kind of Pepe is the last sort of remembrance of the kind of Emre era for me. Whenever I watch Pepe, it's kind of, take me back to kind of Unai Emery. No, look, I think Arsenal have an awful long way to go. I think the test will come. When I think it's more the games when they go away to places like Nottingham Forest on a Monday night or whatever, or they play Brentford away, and also the big teams. Arsenal's record against the top 6 away from home has been atrocious for 4 or 5 years now. Do I think they'll win the league? Absolutely not. Do I think they'll have a good season? I think so. I think Gabriel Jesus. You remind Jesus and Zinchenko and Saliba coming back. They remind you of that Liverpool side. And I'm not saying Arsenal are going to win the league or get to Champions League final in a year or so. Absolutely not. But when Liverpool got Salah and Mane and Van Dijk, and you could just see the progression slowly. I think it's probably similar with that Arsenal side. Look at Saliba at 21 years of age, looks the real deal. I think the fans have been waiting for him for a long time. There's obviously got that song. He just seems ready now for the Premier League. There was a lot of talk that he was talking a lot when he was over in England, or when he was over in France. He was talking about coming back to England, and it just felt like he was ready, but Arsenal obviously didn't. And at the moment, a lot of people are saying, well, why didn't they bring him back sooner? But at the moment, his development looks to be on a really good level. So why would you have risked it? I think Arsenal, what they have to do is capitalize on teams dropping points around them, and they can't afford those slip-ups, because you do feel with Arsenal that come the end of the season there will be a bit of a twitch, but it certainly improvements for Arsenal.
So I think, right, if you looked at Arsenal last season, you'd have said they need a striker. I think the striker was the one thing big time we were lacking. You'd have Aubameyang, who could score the goals, but just not Arse most of the time. Lacazette didn't know where to be at times, and Eddie Nketiah just wasn't good enough, I think, to be a top striker or lead the line for Arsenal. So they got Gabriel Jesus. Like left back, we probably need to cover a left back, and they went out and upgraded Tierney almost, or at least for the games like we've had the first 3 or 4 games of the season, as Zinchenko. And suddenly he's changed the way Arsenal play. So now Xhaka doesn't have to sit. Xhaka can go up and down, and you can have Zinchenko playing the Xhaka role almost. So it's like you've got an extra player in midfield, so long as the opposition isn't good enough. I agree with you that the test will come, like you said, away to Man City, away to Spurs. The games we lost last season, you can list them off: away to Newcastle, away to Brentford, away to Nottingham Forest in the Cup. You just need to watch the documentary. You don't even need to remember the season. But I do think the signing of Saliba is essentially means you've got 3 outrageous signings in Zinchenko, Jesus, and Saliba. And I do think if we sign a winger to replace Pepe, whether that's Harvey Barnes, Neto, I think there's a chance, if just given the circumstances of the season, that the Champions League, Arsenal aren't in the Champions League, so realistically they won't be playing their best players in the Europa League. And just the way the season goes with the World Cup, I definitely think there's a chance that if Arsenal are thereabouts with Man City come the World Cup, 1 injury or 2, either way you can swing it. So Arsenal are 3rd favourites for the league at the moment. I think they've got a chance. I think they've got a chance of winning the league this season. And I just think that next season, perhaps Chelsea, with all the signs that they've made, they'll sort themselves out this season, and they'll be good to go next season. Man City will always be there. but they might not be as strong because it's Haaland's first season. Liverpool might respond from maybe the dodgy start and to get off to a good start next season. Spurs will have another year under Conte. So I don't think you can underestimate that. It could be a massive opportunity for Arsenal and Mikel Arteta to at least compete for a Premier League, because that doesn't mean, just given the strength of the Premier League, Newcastle United obviously outrageous, and even the likes of Brighton are improving into the top 6 perhaps, or aiming for that down the line, that you just can't rule out how competitive the Premier League will get, even more competitive. So all I'm going to say is it's probably a massive opportunity, given the start Arsenal have had. They're 2 points clear of Man City, just to keep the ball rolling with the fixtures they have, to get off to 6 out of 6 perhaps. So it'll all come crashing down about 7:30 against Fulham. Like, why is the Fulham game on at 5:30? Is that just to wind us up? It's not a big game. It should be 3 o'clock, easy win. The fact it's 5:30 worries me a bit, TV game and stuff. But just to finish my point, I do think Arsenal can definitely challenge for the league this season. So I'm all ready to do the 3 games in. Can you believe that?
No, yeah. The less said about that, the better.
I'm clipping it out and definitely won't be using it when we finish 6th after United respond well to finish 5th. And Newcastle are thereabouts. Leaving Arsenal aside, I do think the Premier League is, said this already in the pod, brilliantly poised for a competitive season. And I really enjoyed some of the games, particularly Newcastle City there on Sunday, leaving all the politics aside. Rovers, Sean, did you have a latest score on that? But I want to talk just a little bit about Rovers, the fact they pushed for Tala themselves, the fans pushed to play all their games in Tala in the Europa League, Conference League. They're going to have to put in temporary standing, if I'm not mistaken, but from next season, or whenever they have that permanent league, they won't have to do that again, which is brilliantly. But I think for, like, if the game was in Aviva, I'm sure at some point they would have got 30, 40,000 for one of the big fixtures. But I think for Rovers to have a chance of progressing, considering it's 500,000 euro win, I think it's important they stay in Tala. I think overall, I presume you agree with that.
Yeah, well, just as you mentioned, that Andy Lyons has just put them one up a couple of minutes ago, so that's another big win. And I think you're right. Look, I think if you're an away side coming to Tala or coming to the Aviva, it's chalk and cheese. Now, Tala's a lovely stadium and great work's been there by the council. But absolutely, I think Shamrock Rovers are right and give themselves the best chance of winning. And like, this is a really good Rover side, and it's kind of, they've been on the road, some of them for 2-3 years, and obviously they brought in likes of Richie Tell, and Sean Gannon's been there a few years, and there's a lot of talk of Andy Lyons moving on. So the time is now for Rovers, you do think. And look, I think their fans will be delighted at the games will be in Tala, and like I said, maybe if they do get a marquee side, maybe there is always the option, but you want to play your big games at Tala Stadium, especially when it's your home ground as well. So that's another big win tonight. I know RT was shown, and I think Virgin Media will show their Conference League game. So look, there's no doubt they're the standout team in the country. You've got a brilliant manager who's obviously gone through a very tough time, and I think he's been rewarded with a European group stage by not going to Lincoln, which probably would have been the easier decision to go and ply your trade in England and all the opportunities that has for you. But as I said, fair play to Rovers. They've done a lot right, and they're set for a really exciting couple of months. And obviously the big draw tomorrow for them.
Yeah, massive draw for Premier League clubs like Arsenal in the Europa League, massive draw for Shamrock Rovers. I think the Conference League's 1 and the Europa League's 12, or maybe an hour before, etc. Just the last thing on Rovers, Sean, and we spoke about this a few times. I always felt with that Dundalk side that anytime they got a bit of momentum in the Champions League, their league format dipped off, or they weren't the best side in Ireland. And I felt that for the last few years, we've never managed to get a dominant team that suddenly has their best chance. And I feel for the first time ever, Rovers obviously going 7 points clear with a game in hand with their win over the weekend, that for the first time I feel like we've got our best side in Europe that's already had experience in Europe the previous season. And they're still, if anything, they're constantly improving. And even like you mentioned, Stephen Bradley, the fact he stayed from Lincoln, they seem to have kicked on. And even getting the small bit of a title race for the moment, they've kind of almost put the title to bed, that they can really focus on the Conference League. So I'm quite excited, depending on the draw, to see how this Rovers team do and how they'll if they can progress.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people were raving about Justin Ferrazzi, who was playing tonight. He was a really exciting young talent. He's 17. Obviously, Kevin Zeffi has moved to Italy. So Rovers and look at Gavin Bazuna. Rovers have done a lot of great work underage. I know there'll be a lot of people who'll say, well, they brought in the likes of Danny Mandreo and Andy Lyons and Dylan Watts from Bowes, and in the last 2-3 years. But they have produced a lot of really exciting young talent, and they do a lot of great work in their underage systems. They kind of have the infrastructure and the money, I suppose, for it. But everything's well and on the green side of Dublin.
Yeah, a little bit on Evan Ferguson, Sean. He scored his first goal. I think he made his first start for Brighton. He also had a couple other players playing. So, I'm positive. Like, I think Ireland's going through definitely a transition phase in terms of, like, we don't have players in the Premier League. I think it's a record number of low starters the first weekend. So you can be negative in one sense, but the young talent, I don't think there's been that much young talent coming through as there is now compared to, say, 5 years ago. And I do get excited now. I know it's the Carabao and League One and League Two, seeing the Irish names on these team sheets, but I think it's very important. And for Evan Ferguson, there's been a lot of talk about him. Do you want to maybe tell the listeners, because a lot of people would have heard the name and maybe don't know a lot about him. He obviously got out on the score sheet there last night.
Yeah, well, people have to be careful, because obviously when Troy Parrott was a similar age, 16, 17, a lot of people were bigging him up, and it hasn't quite worked for Troy now. He's obviously gone to Preston now, and he's had League One loans, he's had Championship loan on Millwall that didn't work. Now he's at Preston, so he's kind of in the Championship, kind of still building his way up to maybe playing Premier League one day. Obviously, Evan Ferguson, I think he was 14 when he played for Bowes against Chelsea in that friendly, I think it was. If you see the size of him, you wouldn't think he's 17. I think he's going to lead the line for Ireland against Israel, and that, or certainly be a part of it in that big under-20s clash. I know Graham Potter rates him really highly. He's always talked about him in press conferences. He's kind of been on a few benches in the Premier League and that. But yeah, he's another one of these exciting young players coming through, and it is interesting. Look, I know people are very critical when a lot of good young. I know Evan Ferguson, left from Bowes, but the people more critical at the likes of Dara Burns, Dawson Devoy, Liam Kerrigan. People leave, and I know League of Ireland clubs want to make sure they're getting as much money for these players, which is absolutely right. I think that's hugely important for these clubs, particularly with the funding model that's in place at the moment. But when you see these players move to clubs abroad and start to make a name for themselves, it can be life-changing for some of those players. It really can be. You're a promotion or two away from hitting the jackpot in terms of being able to secure a financial future for your family, and all through playing football, which is just not feasible here. So I know Dawson Devoy and Dar Burns was on the score sheet himself against Watford in the Cup the other day. I know MK Don's got an awful lot of stick, but they 1,200 fans at Watford for a Cup game and singing Dawson Devoy's name in the away end, and Liam Kerrigan scored for Como, and now Aaron Connolly, I think he was on the score sheet for Venezia in Serie B, and just for these players to get that experience of playing abroad, and they're going to bring that all back for the 21s, a lot of them, for that Israel game. So it is interesting. Like, there's a lot of different paths for some of these players to make it, and I suppose making it isn't playing in the Premier League anymore. It's probably being able to make a living in Championship League One. Obviously the SPL, I know there was some stat that a huge number of players are Irish playing the SPL, and probably people have never heard of them. Same with League Two. You look at a lot of clubs like Rochdale, Newport. There was a lot of Irish players there over the last couple of years. But if you look at the young players coming through, and obviously Evan Ferguson's one of them, and I think James Furlong came on for Brighton the other night, there is a lot of good happening in the Irish youth system, and I think we'll hopefully see the fruits of that in a year or two, or maybe might have to be the 2024 Euros or the 2026 World Cup or whatever it is. But like I said, there's a lot of good coming, and we just have to be patient.
And very quickly, the Israel under 20s, or the Ireland under 21, 5,000 tickets sold for the final, or for the crucial game against Israel.
Yeah, I think that will be a sellout closer to the time. I think that will gather momentum, because it'd be unbelievable for an Ireland under 21 side to qualify for a major tournament, considering it's Jason Knight could be playing, Adam Ida could be playing, Troy Parrott could be playing, Bazuna. Yeah, so
20.
There's huge amounts of talent, and I know it's the same with every club. I think Saka could be playing for England, for example. I know Smith Rowe can play, but it's huge for this Irish side to be able to to get to a major tournament, and just that experience. And for people like Connor Coventry, I know he was playing for West Ham during the week. You know, it's huge for them because he's been around that Ireland under 21 side for a couple of years. I think he's won the record caps. Same with Leo Connor as well. But it'd be massive for Ireland and a big chance. And like I said, that game being at Tallaght gives them every chance of winning.
Yeah, I think for us, it's just we never had a situation where we've had so many young players in the senior team. So despite all that, the fact the under-21s are doing so well, and given the rocky start they had post-Kenny, I think that's brilliant that they've been able to keep that going. So absolutely watch that space for the Israel game. LIV Golf, Sean. I don't even know where to start with this. So it's for anyone who's not a golf nerd, it's all kind of kicking off in the golf world. So the 20 top players had a meeting. The players are saying the PGA Tour just trashed out a number of things in terms of what they wanted to do. There was no agents' presence. Jay Monahan wasn't there, who's the PGA Tour commissioner. And the first thing that's come out of that is Tiger Rory from the January 2024 having a series of indoor events over the course of 2 hours. They're going to have team golf, lots of different stuff through an organization that Tiger and Rory have set up, but it's all through the PGA Tour, at least with the blessing and perhaps co-sanctioned with the PGA Tour. PGA Tour have announced a number of featured events. It's going to be, it's kind of complicated, but if you want to read up on it, but just to give you a summary, that they're going to have featured events where the main players are going to play, and then there's a sort of like the normal tournaments where the rest of the PGA Tour can play. But if you're in the top bracket, you're still going to have to play some of the smaller events, a lot of that stuff, and it's not a sort of closed shop. If you're good enough in the middle events, you'll eventually reach the top, that sort of thing. So it is a pyramid. There's a lot more money involved. They have this top 20 players they're going to pay out every year. I think it was the prize fund was 50 million. Who's going to move the needle? If you remember, they had that, and I think Brooks and Bryson were kind of trying to get their name out there so they could win that. They doubled that prize pot. So they are trying a lot of money. The one criticism you'd say is, where was this money in some ways, and where was the innovation from the PGA Tour perhaps? And maybe they were kind of sleeping, and people are like, oh, Phil was right and all this. But I think to summarize it with the golf, and before I get you in here, Sean, I think the last week or two have kind of solidified the PGA Tour standing as this is going to be the future of golf. And if they want it to be the future of golf, they need to rely on the likes of Rory and Tiger Woods and these top players to push forward these new ideas that eventually will make the tour better, because the PGA Tour was far from perfect anyway. There is definitely boredom creeping in with a lot of this. I think the WGCs have never taken off outside the match play, perhaps. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening, but I think for the last week or two, it's been interesting PGA Tour. I will read some of the response from LIV golfers in a second, Sean, but your thoughts, I know you haven't been following as closely, or you've been kind of, it's easy to get lost if you're outside the golf bubble, but for you, your kind of thoughts on the last week or two.
Like, I've never heard people talk about golf as much outside a major week. It's no, look, it's mental. I know you're going to mention Lee Westwood's comments. I think Shane Lowry put up emoji under an Instagram post of the comments. So there's a lot of that to and fro in the golf world. It's hard to keep up with it.
And just as mates, like I'm sure Larry and Westwood got on and Poulter, and I'm sure they're kind of half joking, half serious. Like at the end of the day, you're kind of throwing us under the bus here, you know?
Yeah, and obviously, like, it's good and bad for golf in the sense that a lot of people are talking about golf. A lot of people want to read about golf. Obviously, the natural links to Saudi Arabia bring a lot of different people into the sport. You know, maybe people who are interested in the Middle East are interested in kind of sports washing. You've PGA Tour of the last 4 years just shown that they just want to splash the cash. You know, they're obviously one of the most successful sport brands and sporting bodies out there. But their biggest asset will always be Rory and Tiger, and I think that's come to the forefront with this brand new idea. Not sure how it's going to work. Look, they've tried. The European Tour have done a lot of innovative work with the Hero Golf Challenge, and look, I don't know how much interest there is for that. I think the problem with professional golf at the moment is there's too many events, just on too similar a golf course. I think the fun and the interest would come if there was more links golf, if there was more match play or more foursomes. I don't think it's with all this kind of innovative indoor golf. I don't know. I don't see it there. look, maybe. And when you splash the cash, something will stick. When you throw enough mud at the wall, something will stick. So it'll be just interesting to see.
Yeah, they're throwing a lot of money on it at it. I guess what people ultimately want, I think, and what I do agree that we do, of course, want more links golf, we want more foursomes, we want more match play. But I think at the core of it, we want to see the best players taking each other on the whole time and slightly reduce fields so you can build up a rivalry. Like I always felt like, say Rory, JT would never really have a final round on a Sunday because I know they had it there very recently, just as LIV Golf kind of separated from the PGA Tour coincidentally, but it's just an example that you want to see more of that, and you want to see the more of the top players taking on each other, but you don't want to close shop as well. You definitely don't want what LIV Golf has, mainly because of the Saudi link, etc., but also the sort of format they have is, I've watched bits of it, it's a shite, to be honest with you. Lee Westwood's close. I'm not convinced by the strategic alliance because I've seen how the PGA Tour has behaved over the years. There's not been much give. They've always been bullies, and now they're getting their comeuppance. All the PGA Tour has done since Tiger came on tour is up the prize purses. In turn, that has taken all the best players from Europe away from the European Tour. They have to play in the States, taking all their world ranking points with them. That was their strategy. Put up the money, get all the players, hog all the world ranking points. What we've seen over the last few months is just LIV doing what the PGA Tour has done for the last 25 years. If I'm reading these quotes correctly, Sean, is Lee Westwood given out for getting the chance to win too much money on the PGA Tour over the last 25 years?
Yeah, it's just pure hypocrisy. No, that's what I took from it anyway. You know, him to say all that thing, and you know, you never heard a peep of those players when they were taking the money from the PGA Tour. And you know, you look at him, that the likes of Lee Casey, Justin Rose, Ian Poulter, these kind of global golfers that have spent the majority of their last 6 years playing PGA Tour events only, and maybe the odd BMW, or I know Lee Westwood hosted the British Masters as well. But it's, you know, when you're listening to golfers try and patronize, it's a bit like, oh,
yeah,
give me a break.
The top quote here, Sean, just to my age was obviously part of my decision making process to join LIV, but then there is the fact that LIV tournaments are 54 holes, not 72. I saw that as a benefit. I also had a look at the senior tour schedule. Even they are encouraging guys to play as many as 25 events, and there are 2 pro-ams every week unless you're in a certain category. That's a lot for a senior. But of course, LIV events are offering 10 times the prize money. So there it is. There is always one line somewhere.
But there's pro-ams in the LIV event. Donald Trump was playing in it a few weeks ago. I know. Look, it's just it's got to the stage now where it's like, I'm actually annoyed. Obviously, the Tour Championship's going to finish. It's going to be a small break. Then the fall season's going to come in, and then look, as long as, I don't know, golf will be in a completely different space when the Masters come. We'll know an awful lot more in April. We'll know, I think by April, we'll know the stance of whether LIV get the World Golf Rankings or not, which is a huge thing. And if I'm not mistaken, it's your man, Richard Dawson, who's in charge of that, who was the head of the RNA for years. So that'd be an interesting one. We'll know the stance of the 4 majors, and we'll know how LIV has got on in the intervening 6 months and what happens with the PGA Tour. But like I said, I think if they get world rankings and the majors are okay with it, I think we'll see a lot more players jump ship, take the money, know that they'll get world ranking points and that they'll be able to qualify for the majors. So it's going to be very interesting. What is it, 6 months or so? A little bit over 6 months
to the Masters. Yeah, just on last thing on that. So there's going to be 7 players announced now. The next announcement of who's going to join LIV, Cam Smith is one of them. It's no laying up with a few other sources. Kind of, they know the other 5. They're kind of middle, or at least they know they weren't in that meeting. So I think there's one spot where people are saying, yeah, if someone comes out from that PGA Tour meeting, it's all over basically. But I just think there's been a strong alliance. A lot of people are saying, and I agree with it, I'm surprised it took the players this long the players that are staying, that is, to sit in a room and flesh it out and say, lads, what are we going to do about this? Because our whole careers are under threat here, for want of a better way of putting it. So look, if one positive comes out of it, and I think we spoke about it on the podcast before, that the majors will be even bigger, which I think ultimately is what golf is built around. It's what tennis is built around, and you can pump all the money. And they, in fairness, the PGA Tour are well able to do that themselves with the FedEx Cup playoffs, 10 million, whatever it is now, I don't even know, 15 million. Yet it all comes down to the 4 majors every year for 99% of golf fans. In fact, I'd say 100% of golf fans, because if you're really into golf, it's all about the majors. And if you're not into golf at all, it's all about the majors. And everything in between is all about the majors. So if they can become even bigger, not in terms of prize money, but in terms of all these players and LIV Golfs, and if there's a couple of boos on course and a bit of, look, you take the money. I have no problem with anyone taking the money, but you got to deal with the consequences. You got to deal with Scotty Scheffler walking across your line, or you got to deal with a little bit of pushback. But as someone said about these LIV golfers, they just can't help themselves getting involved. The likes of Lee Westwood, just shut up the fuck up and just get on and live happy out with your money, and that's all good with us. But at the end of the day, I think there's a bit of fight back with the players, like John Ram, Rory McIlroy, JT, Shane Larry was in that meeting. From Shane Larry and above, anyone still on the PGA Tour was in that meeting. So Hideki Matsuyama, I think, wasn't, but I think that was to do with the language barrier and stuff. They wanted to kind of trash it out there, etc. So I'll be more hopeful for PGA Tour, and I think they can kind of come up with new ways of making it better for the golf fan. But yeah, there is a lot of money obviously being pumped into PGA Tour too, so it's a bit of a kind of quid pro quo for that one.
Yeah, like I said, look, we'll know more by the time Augusta comes around, and there'll be a lot of more defectors. And I think it was very interesting, though, that Jay Monahan said that anyone who has joined LIV will never be kind of welcome on the PGA Tour. I thought that was a very, very interesting.
Did you see the clip of him answering it?
No.
There was a 2-second pause, and he just no.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that. But look,
I presume the players.
There's probably legal implications as to why they can't. That's
yeah,
the big problem with this.
And in 6 months, we'll definitely know whether Patrick Reed was successful with his lawsuit against Golf Channel and for defamation. So there you go. Sean, anything else in the world of sport? Last thing before we wrap up.
I think we should mention Kieran McGean.
Yeah, go on, yeah.
Yeah, obviously winning the silver, outstanding, and I know we kind of touched on it all last week at the Athletics. They had a brilliant championship, and long may it continue.
Absolutely, Mark English with the bronze as well. The sprinters that we covered last week, it was a bonus territory, I thought, for Irish athletics, and I think now's the time to really invest in these athletes. It's exciting times for athletics with the World Championships next year, Europeans next year, as we talked about last week, and then on to Paris 2024. But also it's important, and I've heard a lot of people speak about this, that after Paris 2024, the momentum continues to be picked up, because there should be a lot of young talent coming through, and we need to put the professional coaching in place to make that happen, because a lot of these athletes, particularly the older ones, have kind of succeeded in spite of the system as opposed to with the system, you know. But yeah, that's it for me. That's it for Sean. Thanks a mil for listening to us on Tackling Sport. We'll be back next week. We're hoping to introduce our weekly show, but with a guest each week, so stay tuned for that. All that's left to say is enjoy the sport, and a lot of stuff on Premier League, and enjoy the midweek action next week as well. But take care, and we'll chat to you next week. Bye for now.